Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Raw podcast. Phil here in the hosting chair, joined as ever by my colleagues Jason Jones and James Copley. We're going to have a chat about Sunderland 1, Everton 1, Sunderland's return to Monday Night Football after many, many years' absence, and a few other bits and bobs as well. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the game, but first and foremost, I want a two-word answer from you both. Good point or bad point? James?
Good point. Absolutely good point.
Jace?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it all morning. I think I'm going to go good point, bearing in mind that first half hour. So,
yeah, I think the fact that you're even asking that question, Phil, is testament to how far Sunderland have come, really, in a short space of time.
It is, isn't it? And I guess it was a strange game to kind of process coming away from it, because you do feel a little bit frustrated only because, there was such a marked difference between the last hour of the game and the first half an hour in Sunderland's performance. And you kind of think, well, if we just started like that, maybe we'd be sat second in the Premier League. But you're absolutely right, James. That is revealing itself in terms of the way the expectations have changed. I mean, we'll start with you, James. Just give us your thoughts kind of as that first half an hour unfolded. It was very unlike what we've seen from Sunderland this season. What was your kind of feeling on what went wrong there?
It felt for the first time to me that there were sort of rabbits in the headlights a little bit. They really struggled to get hold of the ball. I thought the midfield balance was perhaps a little bit off. I'm sure we'll talk about formations, but you went with five at the back, which provided defensive stability later in the game. But I thought for that early period when Everton were on top, it looked like we were sitting just a little bit too deep and we couldn't sort of recycle the ball. We couldn't get the ball moving. But then we sort of weathered the storm, didn't we? Obviously went a goal behind, but for the last 10 minutes of the half, I thought we were really, really, really positive. So I think given the chances Everton had, actually thinking about it, obviously they hit the post, didn't they? Roofs made a save in the second half, and there was that breakaway Everton counter-attack towards the end of the game, which they definitely should have scored from. So I'm pretty happy with that point. Obviously, there's a contentious VAR decision to talk about as well, but I think on the balance of play, I think that's a decent draw. Weird though that Sunderland was so bad in the opening 30 minutes, and then Everton sort of traded places with them in the second half, and I thought they were really poor and really dropped off. So it was a bit of a strange game in that regard. But to get to November unbeaten at home in the Premier League, I think is a brilliant achievement for this group, for Régis Lebris. What is it, 18 points from 10 games? That's more than we could have imagined, really, isn't it? So I'm very satisfied, very happy. And as I mentioned earlier, I do think it's a mark of how far we've come, that we're sort of, the question's in our mind, isn't it? Could we have got 3 points there and gone second? Is it a bit of a missed opportunity? But that's a good, healthy place for the club and the fan base to be, in my opinion.
It was a weird game, Jace, mainly because for the first 10, 15 minutes, it was like, okay, nobody wants to press here. And I thought that was kind of very, very obvious that, the other team were very, very happy to let the defenders have it. And I think, to be fair, it took Sunderland a while to get comfortable with the way that was how the game was going to go, because even in the Championship, we weren't a team that were spraying it about from the back and having 60, 65% possession very often. It felt to me like Everton got it right early on in the way they kind of set up to counter what we're very good at.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the other point I would make is that sort of regardless of what the other team's doing, regardless of what formation you're playing, if you're going to consistently and frequently misplace 5 and 10 yard passes, then you're going to ultimately play yourself into a world of trouble, aren't you? And I think that James is right. This is sort of one of the first times, maybe the first time this season, where I felt that Sunderland were properly panicked for a bit. Just sloppy. It just felt like just individual sloppiness was really costing them in that first half hour. And then off the back of that as well, I felt like it was the first time that we've, for a while, really seen Sunderland sort of lose their head. There was obviously that little passage where Siddiqui got booked, Mukiele gets involved with the ref, he then gets booked. And it felt as if the likes of your Granit Xhaka, I think Reinildo piled in as well, like they were desperately trying to sort of get a lid on this to try and like grapple it back into some sort of modicum of control, because at that point it looked as if Sunderland were really in danger of completely losing their composure, and who knows how damaging that could have been if they'd fallen more than one goal behind. Which again, I also think it's worth pointing out that most other teams punish you way worse than Everton did last night. I think, Sunderland can count themselves really fortunate that in that first half hour they were playing a team who at times seemed utterly determined to not put the ball in the back of the net by any means necessary. And I think if they're playing pretty much any other side in the division, they probably find themselves 2, maybe even more behind by the time that they actually spark themselves into life. And that's why the game's dead and buried, really.
Everton's strike is very much giving Sunderland 23-24 vibes. And just nobody seems to put it in the back of the net. And I think David Moyes said it in his post-match press conference, James, and I do agree with him. I thought Tierno Barry's miss about 35 minutes in, when Grealish dinked that lovely cross to the back post. I thought that was a massive moment in the game. Reminded me a little bit, obviously a lot more low-key, of Sheffield United's goal getting disallowed at Wembley. It almost was like, right, come on, we've got to get a grip to this. We've got to start playing now, or this game's going to be over. And I thought from that moment on, I thought Sunderland were the better team by a significant distance. But I thought that was a huge moment in the game, James. You're either on mute or I can't hear you.
I'm muted. I thought it was a huge let off that, actually, because I don't know what you think, but it's probably, I'm not a professional footballer, but to me as a layman, it looks harder to miss than it is to score. I know he's sort of flying through the air and stuff, but it's such a good chance that you'd expect, a player of that quality playing in the Premier League to put it away. So yeah, this is why I say a point's a fair result. That there were chances for both teams. There were, different things going on in the game. I thought actually Dan Ballard sort of encapsulated Sunderland's performance as a whole, because I thought in the first 30 minutes he was possibly the worst I've ever seen him play. Nothing just was going right for him. He was missing headers, giving away fouls, but he kept his head, he improved. And then by the end of the game, I was like, yeah, that's why he's like a top quality defender and we all love him. But it was a bizarre night. But on another note, I actually think quite nice really for Sunderland to have that sort of national gaze back on them on Monday Night Football, because it's become such a staple of your sort of British sporting week, hasn't it? Monday Night Football with Jamie Carragher and Dave Jones and all of that. So to see Sunderland covered on Monday Night Football, I thought was quite nice to see. And I think the last time we appeared on Monday Night Football in the Premier League was 2016 in September against Everton, and we lost 3-0 to a 11-minute Lukaku hat-trick. I was in the stands that night. I think David Moyes was the Sunderland manager, and he played Lyndon Gooch left wing Lyndon Gooch was it? Yeah, Lyndon Gooch left wing and Duncan Watmore right wing. So it wasn't a vintage Sunderland attack. I think Januzaj played off Defoe, and I think that continued our winless start to the season, and Everton were unbeaten under Ronald Koeman. So it feels like a lot's happened since then. We've sort of dipped out of the national consciousness, but we'll come on to his interview. But I thought, sort of led by Kyril Louis-Dreyfus, we've really maybe arrived back on the top flight stage. We were talking, Phil, weren't we? And we were saying that you have to be wary because it can all go wrong quite quickly as well, can't it? So I thought, away from the game, that was sort of a nice subplot that Sunderland had a bit of a national gaze on them again.
We'll get into some of the kind of Sunderland performances, and especially the second half, because we've talked a bit about what went wrong there. So we should talk about what went right. But the VAR one, obviously Michael Keane's handball, James and I in the press box both said this is going to be a penalty. I don't profess to be a refereeing expert, and I don't really know what the handball rule is anymore. I don't think anyone does. But Jace, surely that's a penalty. 2 hands pushed towards the ball. He's making himself twice the size. The VAR sort of tweet said his arm position was deemed to be justifiable. I don't know. I just don't quite get it. I think it's a penalty.
Yeah, I think you're right, to be honest, Phil. Judging by what we saw last night, I don't think you're the only one who isn't really sure what the handball is anymore, to be perfectly honest with you. It looked for all the world as if it was a penalty. And that's not just like some sort of Sunderland bias or whatever, but it's based on the precedent that we've seen this season. Those have been given pretty consistently over the course of the early stages of the campaign. Like you said, Michael Keane's both hands are out, really. It obviously strikes both of them. The only sort of justification I think is that they think, obviously because it's hit the one hand and then the second, do they then think that the first hand, that left hand that's come across his body, isn't quite making his frame big enough to therefore be deemed an unnatural position? But even then, that feels like it's a bit wishy-washy, because it looks as if he's done that. And then, the key for me was that that's not just a ball that is trickling out of play. That's not a ball into nothing. That's the ball is being driven across the face of goal. And who knows where it ends up if, he doesn't come over all Harlem Globetrotter and punches it away, So I'll be honest with you, I was baffled by it. And I thought maybe watching it back, I'd see something in it that made me go, okay, I can at least understand where they're coming from. But I've seen it a few times now, and I still can't quite wrap my head around it, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, like, James, none of us want to see handballs given for those ones where a winger smashes across and the defender's arm's low to his side and it just whacks him from a yard away. But that's just not what we're talking about in this instance, is it? There's a clear King makes a clear movement towards the ball. Like, that's not a position to defend across. It's just not, is it?
No, it's not. And I'll throw this. I'll say some words out in a second, but I'll throw it back to you two. Would either of you have a problem if Dan Ballard had been penalised for something similar at the other end? Because I certainly wouldn't have.
Well, I would have whinged about it, but that's.
Well, I would have whinged. I would have whinged maybe at Ballard, but not the referee, because I just think it's a stonewall penalty. Yeah. I think there's enough separation between where the ball's played to his hand. His hand, for me, isn't in a justifiable position because it's out on a sort of 90-degree angle, isn't it? Yeah. Away from him. I think it's a penalty all day long. And it's confusing because we've seen stuff like that given. As you mentioned, we were lucky enough to see it on the monitors pretty much straight away, and we both instantly said, that's a penalty. I think pretty much everybody in the ground would agree. The Sunderland players were instantly sort of furious. And I know players appeal for a lot nowadays, but that's sort of usually a good sign, isn't it? Because they were like, really, really frantic. You could tell that there was a strong appeal. So, yeah, I don't understand it. We're not one to dig out referees and officiating on this podcast, but I thought the official of the day was poor for both sides. He let a lot go, but I don't think that was to the improvement of the game, to be honest, because there were some bad fouls in there that went unpunished. I thought he sort of lost the grip on it, but yeah, handball all day for me. Luckily, it hasn't cost us too badly though. But yeah, I mean, it's the first time actually that I've felt sort of wronged by VAR. Sunderland's experiences with VAR since the playoff final against Sheffield United and then in the Premier League have actually been quite good, really. So it's a strange feeling.
It was strange as well how quick the check was as well. It was just like, never a penalty. And that again just confused me because I was like, if I seen a different clip here, it was unusual. I think
surely it's worth sending him to the monitor to look at that.
Strange, really, really strange. And if they send him to the monitor and he goes and looks at it and says, "Actually, I stand by my decision," I'd still think it was the wrong decision, but I'd sort of respect that. But the fact that it was just it was very that old classic, like good process, wasn't it? And you're watching it going, "Is it?" I don't know, just unusual. But let's not dwell too much on the referees, Jace. Sunderland were excellent from, as we mentioned, about half an hour onwards. Didn't create loads and loads. Obviously, I'm thinking of Michele's big chance towards the end where he nods Xhaka's cross wide. What a cross, by the way. My word, he does some things on a football pitch that just kind of your jaw just drops. But didn't create loads of chances, but I thought it was a really strong performance, Jason, and lots of good individual performances within that as well. Xhaka, obviously. I thought Enzo, he really feels like a Premier League player now. There are a lot of good signs, aren't there, in terms of how this team is kind of building.
Absolutely. And, I think it says something as well that they're able to produce that level of performance having started so badly as well. I think it is really testament to Sunderland that they were able to steady themselves, because there were some really poor performances for that first half hour. But from that, like you say, I think that the Barry miss was sort of like the fulcrum in the match. And I think from that point onwards, there were some really, really assured individual performances. Obviously, Granit Xhaka is going to get all of the plaudits, not just because he scored, but because, well, frankly, he's Granit Xhaka, isn't he? He's all that they were talking about before the game. He's probably all they're going to be talking about afterwards as well. But I felt that he was, as impressive as he was sort of emblematic of a wider turnaround for Sunderland. I thought that next to him, Noah Siddiqui for that first half hour, he's been exemplary this season. I was really quite worried by him in that first half hour. To then, at the age of 20, to be able to actually bring himself back under control and to put in the sort of performance that he did for the remainder of the match, I thought was really, really impressive. Like you say, Enzo Lefebvre, another one, his work rate just so commendable, isn't it? Because I think when he initially arrived on Weir's side, did any of us really have him pegged as that sort of player? You know, obviously we were told that he could play as like an 8 and he didn't mind playing a bit deeper, but I think our impression of him was very much that he was going to sort of come in and be that mercurial playmaker, and he's proven that actually he's got another side to his game entirely, you know. So yeah, across the board, I thought that Sunderland on an individual basis were actually really good for the remainder of the game. I still think that in an ideal world, as you sort of alluded to, Phil, you would like to see them create a few more clear-cut chances. But I think that even on the balance of what they did create, if they had gone on and found that second goal, I don't think Everton could have really had too many complaints.
No, I mean, even David Moyes said that after the game. You know, he said after half an hour, if he'd said I was only going to get a point from the game, I'd be disappointed. But by the end, you know, I'm quite pleased with the point, and I think that reflected it. James, was Xhaka your man of the match? Was it that straightforward for you? Was there anybody else you would kind of throw into that equation? We've mentioned Lefebvre there, who, yeah, I thought was up there with Xhaka, but I thought Geertruida really strong as well, did the basics well, especially in that first half hour. I thought a lot of players looked a little bit lost at sea. I thought Geertruida was really strong. Any kind of thoughts generally on anyone you wanted to kind of pick out last night?
Yeah, I think Xhaka and Lefebvre were the two standouts for me. I'm always really impressed by Ronaldo. You know, I think he likes getting stuck in. I don't know if anybody noticed, but he was in the exact same place that he did that stupid foul against Aston Villa and got sent off and kicked out. There was a moment when he was on the floor again, and I just thought, oh, is he gonna have a little bite again? Because his opposite number from Everton was having a little go, but he kept his head this time. Yeah, Lefebvre is so impressive on that left-hand side. I think it's just his general work rate is not something we expected to see, and that's no slight on him, but we all had him pegged as this sort of creative genius, which he is, but to then transfer that onto the left-hand side and to do the dirty work for your team, it's really exceptional. But yeah, Granit Xhaka, I mean, every time I see him in a Sunderland shirt, it still hasn't really sunk in. He's so good. And even when you're signing him in the summer, you're thinking, what's the catch? There must be a catch. Granit Xhaka, probably age or lack of legs or something's going to go wrong with that, because it just doesn't make sense that we should be getting such a player for, you know, relative peanuts as well. If you consider the contribution to the team already, the money we've paid for him looks like an absolute steal, to be honest. I'm convinced he gets into any team. Well, I was going to say any team apart from the top four, but we're in the top four, so that's quite nice. But he gets into most teams in the league for me, and it absolutely improves them. It's just such a driving force, and it was really interesting, actually, Phil, when we were at the under-21s last week, who were playing Anderlecht in Europe, and Granit Xhaka was in attendance, and I asked the under-21s coach, Graham Murty, about it afterwards, and the influence Xhaka's having at the Academy of Light, he's feeding back, having watched the game, to the under-21s players. You know, he's available for the coaches to talk to for mentorship. It's just, it's such a brilliant sign that I'm struggling to sort of comprehend that he's a Sunderland player. And on the ball is absolutely one of the best I've seen at the club. He's just sensational. Everything he does is, and the scary thing is he seems to play the game at sort of half speed. I'm sure there's higher gears he could reach to, but he just glides, and it reminds me a little bit, but playing slightly further forward, because Paul Scholes used to drop very deep, but he's just got a picture in his head. And if you watch him closely, which I often do during matches, the amount of scans he makes with his head, he constantly twisting and turning and looking around him and building up that picture, the awareness, I just think he's brilliant. I could talk about him all day. As I say, as you said, the quality of delivery from outside the box for that Makwele chance was just utterly breathtaking, a moment of real quality that deserved an assist for a goal. I just think he's fantastic.
It's a real weapon, that first time cross, isn't he? Like 99% of players take a touch, don't they? And he just whips it in. He did it for Isodor's goal, didn't he, against Brentford? And you just have that little gasp when you see he's going to do it.
Jason, he's got four goal contributions now as well, which has gone under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, I think James Tarkowski can claim a large amount of credit for last night's, but you've got to get it on target. Jace, we talked a little bit about the formation earlier. I think there's a debate to be had about the merits of playing with a back five at home, whether you should get another player in midfield. I suspect ahead of Arsenal is probably not the time to be having that debate, though, because I think A, because of their quality, and B, because of their set piece proficiency, and C, because of the fact that Sunderland actually ended the game really well in this 5-4-1 formation. Personally, I'd be amazed if he makes any significant changes on Saturday. What's your kind of feeling?
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. I think you would presume it will be another five at the back, wouldn't you? I think that the thing with last night was that, to a certain extent, I wonder if he maybe almost made a rod for his own back, because Sunderland was so good against Chelsea in a five. And because, as we spoke about on the pod last week, the five who made up that backline were so impressive. We said, didn't we, how do you take any of them out? And so is he in a position where he's thinking, well, actually, I can't really change this side because it performs so well, even though maybe there was an argument to go with a four. You're at home, you're against an Everton side who sort of been struggling a bit for form and can be got at. I think ultimately the compromise we're seeing, isn't it, is that Sunderland are essentially playing a 4-3-3 when they're moving forward. Mukiele moves out to the right, Trey Hume steps into midfield. I think that has at times looked as if Sunderland are still maybe getting to grips with that a little bit, but when it works, as it did towards the sort of back end of the game yesterday, I think it's a perfectly serviceable way of approaching things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Arsenal at the weekend, you know, it's sort of unusual, isn't it, that you see such a dominant side at the top of the table who are willing to be so sort of blood and guts and physical and focus on their set pieces and really bombard your box. But I think for those reasons, you know, in very much the same way that he did against Chelsea, I think Louis will be more than happy to set up a team who are willing to go toe-to-toe with Arsenal in a sort of aerial bombardment, really see what they can do in terms of defending their own box, and then hopefully look to pick them off on the break. I appreciate it'll be a very, very stern test, and much sterner test than even Chelsea provided. But I think that if there is a way of Sunderland to get anything out of the game, then you would have to assume that'll be the way that they will do it.
Because it's Arsenal, Phil, would you consider bringing Alderweireld back in if he's fit for Trey Hume? I love Trey Hume. I've got Trey Hume pyjamas. But to have that extra height, maybe Mukiele onto the right-hand side, who probably could step into midfield, he's certainly got the quality. Do you think that's something you'll consider?
Possibly, but he did. I mean, Alderweireld is still in the concussion protocols, so that was kind of what Lebris said after the game, that he was still experiencing some symptoms. I mean, we're Tuesday now. You know, how much training time is he realistically going to have before Saturday? And you don't take risks with concussions, do you? So I think, in theory, I think it's a really interesting debate, and I would be tempted to bring Alderweireld in mainly because of his composure on the ball. But I suspect it's probably unlikely that he's going to be fully fit to start this game. I mean, I do get the debate, James, because it can look a little bit clunky at times when it's Hume in midfield on the ball, and you think, well, why don't we have Chris Rigg in there on the ball? But I think also it's worth saying that the reaction from and this isn't just Régis Lebris, this is the players themselves taking ownership for this. You know, so Granit Xhaka talking about Hernandez and Luffier, saying, you know, we just weren't at our standards in the first 25 minutes. We were just sloppy. And I think it's a little bit soon to judge the formation on home turf. And I say that as someone who, I don't really like seeing something in the back five at home. I want to see them on the front foot. But I'm not sure last night is the night to make a definitive judgment on it, particularly because for the second half in the same shape, without being brilliant and creating loads of chances, we looked all right.
I think what's interesting as well, you mentioned him having a good game, and he did defensively, but Gertruida, he didn't step into midfield maybe as much as I would have expected him to, and I wonder if that's something they'll work on. Maybe it's not for the Arsenal game, because you'd expect him to be pretty flat, to be honest, but going forward in winnable games, if he does want to play a back five, whether that's sort of something you could see as the others bomb on, because he's got that capability. We know he can play in midfield, and he's a great passer of the ball.
We're going to end a little bit just by talking a little bit about, because it's very, very rare that we hear certainly or see from an interview from Kyril Louis-Dreyfus, and Louis-Dreyfus spoke to Monday Night Football before the game. Jace, you kind of watched it. What was your kind of main takeaway from it? Although I know he wasn't saying we are going to finish in the top 10, but even to hear Kyril on Monday Night Football talking about the possibility of strengthening in January to aim for a top 10 finish, it's been a wild ride over the last year or so, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he spoke really, really well. I think the biggest thing you would say about it is that even if you're looking at this from a neutral perspective, and I've seen a few fans of other clubs saying this online already, like it's exactly the kind of interview you want to hear from your owner. You know, he came into it, he spoke about Sunderland's recruitment policy, about the potential for them to recruit again in January. And he did it in a way which suggested that he sort of views this project as one that has a sort of limitless amount of ambition behind it, but one that will ultimately be given the resources it needs to flourish as much as he possibly can. You know, he said, you know, there was this idea that Sunderland didn't really set themselves a budget in the summer. They just went out and got the players that they had to get to make themselves a sort of functionable Premier League team. You know, again, when he was asked about the potential to bring in more players in January, he said, like, you know, well, ultimately the way we started, it could affect the way we're at, because if they were in a relegation battle, they would have been approaching things one way. If they feel as if there's the realistic opportunity for them to go and finish higher up the table, he did obviously allude to a top 10 finish, but you'd have to assume that, you know, given where they are in the table as well, that must be in his thinking until it's not, that he will, you know, look to kick on. It feels as if, like, what he was ultimately saying was that he's not going to rest on his laurels, and he's not going to hamstring Sunderland by, you know, being overly cautious. If he can pump in the resources to make this, or to help this squad rather, reach that next level, then he is seemingly prepared to do that.
I think we know that there's not going to be another 14 players arriving in January, and there's not going to be another 100 and whatever million spent, James. But I think fans will be excited and a little bit reassured to hear that suggestion that Sunderland are going to be proactive about it. And we do definitely need to keep expectations in check, because, you know, Sunderland do not have a blank checkbook for signing £20 million players. But, you know, it's to hear the owner be quite comfortable talking about trying to be as proactive as possible, I think is something that will give people a lot of heart.
Yeah, definitely, and he's progressive, isn't he? He's constantly trying to push the club forward. I mean, if you look just at the evidence in the past sort of 12 to 18 months, he's invested money in the academy, he's invested money in the stadium infrastructure. You know, they've hired new people, they've spent money on marketing, they've spent money on players. Sort of Premier League has triggered this plan that's been laying dormant for a couple of years, and everything's just gone from 1 to 100. And I think you're right to point towards us being a little bit cautious. Obviously, there's money to spend, but it has to be spent correctly as well. We don't want to sort of rush out and hamstring ourselves, because obviously there's PSR to consider as well, isn't there? Which affects you over numerous seasons. I think it's a 3-year cycle, isn't it? So you want to do that sensibly. But if there are deals there to be done in January that are going to help Sunderland, I'm sure they'll do it, absolutely. But I mean, thus far the recruitment from the summer has been exceptional. So I'm very excited to see what they can do, because all of the players that joined Sunderland in the summer have been sold a project and probably needed convincing in some places. Obviously, they've done a very good job at that. There's this video that we'd all like to see that sells the club that nobody's been able to witness yet, apart from the players. But it's exciting to think about the level of a player Sunderland could attract with them sitting sort of fourth in the Premier League, having had all this good publicity. You know, it feels like this Sunderland story is really sort of known and recognisable now. It feels like everybody is aware that Sunderland have pulled themselves out of the doldrums. We're not really thought of that Netflix club that are struggling anymore. You know, we're in the Premier League and challenging, and the surprise package of the season. So in terms of like the optics of transfers and the PR and what makes players join football clubs, which, let's face it, comes down to money mostly, but all of these other things do play a part. I think we could be in for, you know, an entertaining January window. But yeah, I'd like to see us do it sort of calm, calculated, which we have done. And I think the one thing you can say about Sunderland and the current recruitment model is that they'll have a really strong plan and endless reams of names that they can sort of check off and go down. Everybody will be well scouted. There won't be sort of any panic buying. You know, the days of us signing sort of plodders in January to try and spark a season, I think are long gone. So, you know, there's a loan slot as well, perhaps to be looked at. So I think there's a lot of mileage in January, but we would say that because we cover it for a football publication. So.
I mean, one of the things that I thought as well when I watched the Louis-Dreyfus interview back, Chase, was it's something that the club, I think, have got very good at, is how they present themselves and what they're doing to the world, which maybe is not something that we've been associated with in the past, even in the early stages of the Louis-Dreyfus regime, probably. But, you know, we all joked in the summer about Fabrizio Romano and the ambitious project. But there is something to this, isn't it, Jace, that Sunderland have got very, very, very good at their storytelling in terms of what this project is, and particularly in pitching it to young players. I think we're seeing this time and time again now, aren't we? And I felt like this interview was a bit of a continuation of that, of Kyril maybe stepping out a little bit more, feeling a bit more that he can be on the front foot in terms of pitching this narrative that the club has.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the first things that he mentioned was this idea of, you know, building a club and a team that reflects the community that the sort of city can take pride in, and really sort of, you know, building up that connection between the fan base and the squad, and, you know, reinforcing this idea that there isn't really a separation between the support and the club. And I think that, you know, obviously, given the scenes that we saw over the summer, the playoff semi-final, what happened at Wembley, given the start to the season we've had. I mean, we spoke last week, didn't we, about that away end at Chelsea. You know, you've got to assume that for any player looking at Sunderland as a potential destination, you know, the draw of being able to play in an atmosphere like that with the support that is so invested, it must be a lure. And then for the club to have sort of tapped into that and to be really emphasising it as a key selling point, I think it's really canny. You know, it's really astute. I think it obviously helps them in terms of potential recruitment, but it also does give something to a fan base that have been crying out for something like this for such a long time. You know, all Sunderland fans want is a club and a team that they can be proud in, that they can really get behind, and that they can get, that they feel as if there is a sense of hope around, you know, and we've been deprived of that for such a long time, haven't we, prior to the Louis-Dreyfus era, that I think it's kind of a bit of an easy win, in the sense that all it took was somebody to come in with a bit of common sense to go, actually, this is what this club should be, this is what the team should be. But they have tapped into it. They are really sort of, you know, pushing that message. And I think it is to the sort of broader benefit of themselves, fan base, everything, really, you know. And it is interesting as well, you know, he was asked about the idea of bringing in young players, you know, recruiting based on age and whether that was still part of his model. And he said, you know, at this point, I actually think it is in the DNA of the club. And again, that's another thing, that if you're looking at it as a young player, you know, looking to potentially further your career, the amount of young players who've come through the door, Sunderland have kicked on to that next level, whether that is staying on Weir's side or whether that is them moving on to another club. Not to say Sunderland's a stepping stone, but it is ultimately proven to be a means of facilitating, you know, reaching that next level in your career. And I think that when you combine that with the way that the sort of club is presenting itself writ large, you would have to say that it is a really attractive destination. You would have to assume it is, at least.
But I'm interested to get your thoughts on this, and I'm loath to mention it, but do you think in a weird way that Black Cat's Bar debacle might have been the best thing that happened to Louis-Dreyfus? Because at the time it felt like everybody at the club was perhaps a little asleep at the wheel. It wasn't it didn't feel to me like it was deliberate. It felt to me like it was a massive oversight that this sort of thing had been allowed to sort of sneak through the cracks. And it feels like since then, he's sort of taken on a real hands-on role. Whether or not he was sort of still getting his feet under the table at that point, I don't know. But it feels like to me from that moment, he's realised actually that the club needs to be connected to the fans, because there was a real disconnect, a real chasm growing around that time. Obviously, the Michael Beale era as well. It felt quite serious for quite a while there. Obviously, finishing 16th in the Championship, but since then they've really managed to pull the rabbit out the hat.
Yeah, I think you've been very generous describing it as an oversight, I think is what I would say. When, as in, I don't think I would give anyone a pass for that. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it was I think it was a huge mistake, an active mistake, if you like, a decision that was made that shouldn't have been made. And I think it was symptomatic of maybe at that time a club that, or my feeling is at that point was that maybe I'm trying to get around using the word arrogance, but that's kind of what I mean, unfortunately. As in, if you look at some of the transfer decisions around that time, if you look at the way the transition to Mick Beale and that appointment itself, I think that period of 6 months, I think, may potentially have been very humbling. And I think what we saw was a club that learned from its mistakes on and off the pitch. I agree with you that I think we see a much better sort of fan-focused off-the-pitch operation now. I don't think it's a coincidence that, you never hear about the kind of recruitment disputes that you used to hear before Regis came in. Partially that's Regis's personality, partly that's because I think he's listened to more. Do you know what I mean? So I think that it's interesting that you bring up that debacle, and I think you are right to. I think there was a little bit of a reset off the back of that 5-6 months. And listen, I think we have to continue being sort of critical, don't we, and ensuring, that we're always kind of holding the club to account. I think what you can also very fairly do is step back and give credit and say, well, when huge mistakes are made, what you're ultimately asking for is lessons to be learned, right? And so far, that's where the positive angle of it is that we can point to a lot of things where real huge lessons seems to have been learned, and that's why we're sat here now, talking about Sunderland where they are. We also have Kiefer Moore to thank for that a little bit as well. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I think you're right to bring that up. I think there's that whole period of time. I think some lessons kind of were learned in that.
And I say oversight as well, Phil, just simply because we never really got to the bottom of it in terms of the blame game, who done it, did we? There was never sort of that public accountability. So yeah, it was a dark and interesting time. That.
Yeah, well, listen, I think it's ultimately it's not.
The owner has to take responsibility. Yeah,
exactly. It does. In some ways, it doesn't really matter who the actual individual responsible was, because the board are accountable for the football club, right? So I think it's right that they're held accountable to that. But as I say, I think it's also fair at this point for us to step back and give some credit for lessons that were learned. I think that's kind of the whole point, isn't it? Before I let you go, just one quick fire question for you both. Any changes for Arsenal on Saturday, or are we happy with the team that went out last night?
Ooh, it's a good question, isn't it? I suspect it will be the same team, is what I would say. I don't think there's any sort of natural.
That's not what I asked you, Jace.
No,
he'll make three changes because we expect it to be the same. He always does. You know what he's like.
Yeah.
Stop trying to wriggle out the question, both of you. Come on. What team?
No, I don't think he'll make any changes. And I would also like to point out, if Aldereti's obviously not fit, I don't think he'll make any changes. If he is ready to go, which is unlikely, as you say, Phil, I think that could be a potential option. But off the back of that, I would like to highlight just very quickly as well, I thought Traore was really, really good. Obviously, struggled to find his feet a little bit, but I thought he was excellent against Everton. And I think he's certainly one that will retain his place.
Yeah, that's kind of something that I was going to come on to. Like, up until now, I've been a bit skeptical about him being in the starting 11. I thought that last night was comfortably his best performance. I still think, obviously, he's lacking that end product. We saw a couple of sort of wild air shots and swings at goal and all that sort of stuff. Hopefully that will come in time. But that has been the one position where I've looked at and thought, actually, if you were going to make a change, it would be in that wide right area. I think on the basis of the work rate that he put in last night, I saw the merits of him being in the side. And I think for that reason, I wouldn't be surprised if he stays in there on Saturday.
We spoke to Bertrand Traore after the game, and I was stunned to learn that he nearly joined Sunderland when he was at Chelsea before he went to Ajax. I don't remember that transfer link at all. Did either of you? Because that was a surprise to me.
No, there you go. You can go and try and dig it out as a job for you. So are you both saying no changes on Saturday?
I think so.
I'm saying no changes, but with the caveat that Lebris probably will change it, because you know what he's like, and he does the opposite to what we say on this podcast.
That is the worst attempt at a quick-fire question in the checkered history of the Raw podcast.
What do you reckon, Phil?
Yeah, I wouldn't make any changes. I thought most of the performance was good last night. Yeah, I'd go with no changes. But I feel defeated now, so I'm going to call an end to this edition of the Raw podcast. Thank you both very much for joining me. Wherever you're listening, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, please, if you'd be so good. That would be great. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. On the Whistle will be up at tea time, and there's going to be stacks more content coming, both in the build-up to and after the Arsenal game. Let's see how Sunderland get on in El Long Throwico, as I am calling it, and I suspect nobody else will.
To be fair, that's
so,
very good.
Boys, thank you very much for your company. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you again very, very soon.